So last year I was in Amsterdam and in a layover situation, not hitting the red light district, just in case your minds went there. And I was in a layover, and I all throughout the airport were gigantic banners that said Happy Holidays. Everywhere you looked, there were trees, Happy Holidays. And so I just did this little experiment. I just walked up to random people that I did not know, which was simple in Amsterdam, all right? And I said, hey, what is this holiday that's coming up? And they were all shocked. And they would go, Christmas. Christmas is coming up. And I was like, really? I'm like, because it doesn't say anything about Christmas anywhere. And I did this to dozens of people. And they all went, what? And in their own place of employment, in their own place of life, looked around at the banners and the decorations and said, you're right. It doesn't say anything about Christmas. But the holiday is Christmas. And it really just struck me, and so I saw this video this week, and I don't want to get into the political left-right side of it. I just want to say that at the end of the day, the gospel is offensive. Jesus did not say, hey, go into all the world and have little meals with everybody and make them feel good about themselves. And if you get an opportunity to talk about me, do it in a really nice way, all right? He said the only way to the Father is through me. That's the only way. Our founding fathers, interestingly enough, there's a man by the name of David Barton who owns more historical documents from the founding fathers than any museum or organization in the world. Almost every letter that the Smithsonian gets a hold of, it literally puts into a safe and makes it non-viewable for the public. So he started buying these things up, created an organization that they buy up these letters, all of this documentation that's like penned by the founding fathers. And what becomes an unarguable fact is that the founding fathers, by the vast majority, were born-again Christians. In fact, when George Washington's granddaughter was asked at some point, and actually it was his granddaughter, but she was actually raised as his daughter in his home, they asked her, they said, the word is that he was more of a secularist than an actual Christian. And her language was so awesome. She said, you know what? To deny his love for Christ was to deny his love for his nation and his heroic deeds. And in the 50s, two University of Harvard law professors decided that book that letter was in needed to be updated, and they silently removed that from the maxims of George Washington. And so if you go and pull a current copy of it, you won't find that. But if you go before 1950, you'll find that letter from his own granddaughter that was raised as a daughter in his home, saying that she could not remember a Sunday morning, regardless of how cold it was outside, that they did not get up and make the journey to church. And that on that rare occasion that they could not make it to church, that they did church at home, and he led the service. That the men that served with George Washington said that when they were traveling, if they came across another regiment, and for whatever reason they did not have a minister among them, that he would take his chaplain and he would send it with them and then take on the chaplain duties as well as leading his regiment. And so just as we come into this season, the founding fathers did a really great job at not trying to make our government a Christian government, right? That was not their goal. But their goal was to guard the society so that we could be a religious society. And it's very clear when you read the letters. And so I get very defensive, right, about my rights being questioned and taken away from me. And so, yeah, as a pastor at City Church, if you didn't know that about me, if you've had coffee with me yet, you know, like I love our nation. And I am very proud of those men and women who have shed blood so that we can have the freedoms that we have. And I want to see my children grow up in a nation where they can say Merry Christmas and not be assaulted verbally for it, where they can show up and go to church and not be ridiculed because they have faith. Now, if you're in here today and you're a believer, you're probably on some level in agreement with me. If you are not a believer, then today my message is going to, I believe, tap into even this topic. It's very relevant. So last Sunday, I talked about Caesar Augustus being the ruler of the Roman Empire at the time that Jesus came on the scene. And I'll tell you, if you were here last week, I told the church, I said, I don't know what's going on. I feel very tired. I'd gotten up that morning and fallen back asleep while reviewing my notes. I ended up sick and in bed until Tuesday at about lunchtime. And so last weekend's just kind of a blur. And so I hope that last week was good information, but I really plan on driving it home today. So bear with me as we move forward, all right? So turn it on, that helps. All right, so historians say that at the time that Jesus was born, right, that the boundaries of Rome were the boundaries of the earth. Not that the entire globe was ruled by the Roman Empire, but all of what was considered civilized world, of the civilized world, was ruled by the Romans. So here is a map, if you will. This white area right here is all water, but these purple areas represent the reach of the Roman Empire. To this date, today, this is the largest empire to ever rule in the world, not by land mass, right? Because America has more land mass than this, but this was the largest to rule over a variety of cultures and nations. You start right here and you've got Egypt, Israel, Jordan, Syria, Turkey, all right? You move your way all the way across, and right here is Great Britain. So you have a sweeping empire that rules over a vast group of people with different belief systems. It's really interesting because a lot of these people that are now bound into this Roman Empire have historically always been the enemies of Israel. And so Israel was not excluded from this rule. This Roman Empire had birthed a little over 200 years before the birth of Christ here in Italy. Just in the city of Rome, being nothing more than a city, it had grown now to this point. And this is not the largest that it will get. This is just what it looked like at the time of Christ. So Luke, when he begins talking about the birth of Christ, he thought it was a significant thing that we needed to know that Caesar Augustus was the ruler, the ruler of the empire at this time. Caesar Augustus, a good-looking man with an unclothed baby angel tugging at him everywhere he goes. What every great leader needs. Then we find ourselves in Matthew today. And so Matthew wants to take a look at a different leader during the time. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking to us about King Herod, because I want you to have a picture of what it looks like when King Herod is introduced into the story. Because right now, we read through this and we just see it as a fact, giving us some marker in time, and we transition on. But that's not the case at all. The mention of Herod brought a multitude of emotions and feelings, and I'll get to that in just a moment. So he was a young warrior as Augustus had begun to expand the empire. Remember, he had dissolved the Senate. He was an emperor. He was Rome's first emperor. He was answerable to nobody. And as he would expand, he needed rulers in place to help to make sure that people were paying their taxes, to make sure they were staying faithful to the empire. And so he would look for somebody that he thought could be a king or a ruler and would be 100% faithful to him. And he found just such a man in this young warrior named Herod. He was half Jew, he was half Edomite. So he was not a practicing Jew in his belief systems, but by being half Jew, it at least gave some credence for him to be able to come in and be king. Now, in 37 BC, when he was given the reign, right, when he was told, you'll be king, he had to come in and take siege of Jerusalem. In so doing, historians said that as he led 30,000 troops and 6,000 cavalry into the city, that there was an intentional effort on their part to make sure that anybody who was in the street lost their lives. It said that the streets were just literally showered with blood, not just simple killing, but violent murder. You see, the goal here for Herod was that people would be afraid of him. That at the end of this seizing of this city, of this nation, as he became king, that anybody that survived would have great fear in their life. As king, he built altars, inscriptions, temples, and statues throughout Israel, right? All of these things declaring Caesar is God. Now, remember last week when I talked to you about the fact that there was this star that had appeared on the horizon. And it was unique because it wasn't leaving. It wasn't going anywhere like the rest of the stars. It was there day in and day out. And so the people came to Caesar Augustus and they pointed it out and they declared that it was Julius Caesar, who was Julius Caesar was his Caesar Augustus' father, that he was ascending into the heavens to take his place as a god. So there is a star that has birthed into the sky, and all of the Roman Empire now is talking about it. And the decree is that Julius Caesar is now moving into life with the gods, and therefore, if Julius Caesar is a god, then Caesar Augustus is the son of God. And so these altars, these inscriptions, these temples, these statues, all over Israel declared Caesar to be God, but there was a problem. The Jews believed in one of the basic commandments given to them by God the Creator, that there would be no graven images of any god. And so this was an issue for them that created contempt. How did Herod deal with this? He killed anybody that opposed him. He needed to make sure that he had the favor of Augustus at all times so that he would not be replaced. There was a story about a season in King David's life where David had hid in the mountains of Masada. He came to that mountain in those caves and he built a palace on top of it. And this is what he decreed to the people of Israel. He said, if your greatest king lived in this mountain in fear, I will build my palace on top of it. 3 stories tall with hot tubs and cold tubs and a freshwater swimming pool on top of it. In order to get water to his palace, he literally had to go and have all of the current valleys redirected to Masada. The impact on civilization, the impact on the citizens of Israel was huge because their communities were built around access to water. And by redirecting the water to Masada, he literally took their source of water from them. They dug out these giant rocks and created a body or a bed that would hold the water. And in one rainfall, they would get enough water to supply 10,000 people with water for a year. They say that Herod probably employed more people than anyone in the history of the world, with 500,000 employees. Then he decided he needed to build something for Caesar. So he came and he constructed Caesarea. This is a port city in Israel. You can go there today. It is a city. It has been destroyed several times over. He found this area to build this, and this place was so muddy that ships could not get in it. And so he had his engineers develop a system to dredge out the mud from the water to create this port city. The largest port city in the world at this point was in Athens. It was 60 acres in size. So he built one in tribute to Caesar that was 520 acres. He had aqueducts built that were 19 miles in length to bring water in. He created a sewage system within the city that actually operated with the tides, using the tides of the ocean to actually sweep the sewage back out to sea. He was surrounded by the brightest and the smartest. The things that he accomplished were amazing. In fact, in digging through many of the ruins that Herod had ruled over, they have found food that was preserved. And in the 50s, they opened up some of that food. It had dates in it that were still good. They ate them right there. 2,000 years later. Here at Caesarea, he had a palace built for himself. This is an artist rendering of it. It came out into the water on 3 sides. He had this palace built, and he had a swimming pool put on top of it. He did not like to swim in fresh water, and so he had slaves that their job was just to keep fresh water on top of that palace for his swimming pool. hot tubs, cold tubs. They say, one historian, that he was, well, first of all, he did not like the way that ships operated. So he had engineers completely redesign sailing ships and then had an entire fleet of them made. And on one of his journeys coming back from Rome, they said that he saw Caesarea from a distance and said it is not beautiful enough and ordered that the entire city be covered in marble. And to this day, in 70 A.D., General Titus came and destroyed Caesarea. And to this day, the shores are covered with crushed marble from it. He had 11 wives and 43 kids. One historian notes that there was a time where he was making a journey back to Rome and he felt like one of his wives was up to something. He couldn't put his finger on exactly what it was, so he told one of his assistants, he said, I want you to keep your eye on her. I think she's up to something. Well, everybody feared Herod. And so as soon as he was gone, the assistant went to the wife and said, look, he thinks you're up to something, and I don't know how to convince him otherwise. Upon returning back home, this wife was remaining very distant, as you would if you were married to Herod and you knew the type of man that he was. Rather than dealing with it, he just had her executed. At one point, he was convinced that one of his sons was seeking the crown, so he had that son drug out to the family pool and drowned in front of everybody. At another point, he had two sons that he were suspicious were coming after the crown, and so he gave them an opportunity to be able to argue through why they weren't coming for the crown. And the historian that was there wrote and said that this was the most gut-wrenching plea for life that you've ever heard. They begged. They said, Dad, we know what type of man you are. We would never do this. We know what you'll do. And he had them both executed on the spot. At one point, he got into an argument with the ruling body of Israel. He had them all executed and replaced. At another point, he had the elite gathered, those who were the wealthiest among the wealthy. He had them brought into the hippodrome, is what one historian says, that they brought him in, they brought all of the elite in with their families, and then they sealed it up. They had it surrounded by soldiers. And he came out and said, on the day I die, you will all be brought here and killed, so that there is a guarantee that upon my death, there is weeping and mourning. This created a constant rift between him and the Israelites. Those who were not in the elite, those who did not have anything to lose, did not trust him, they did not like him. And so he decided that he would do something as a sign of goodwill. He increased the footprint of the Temple Mount. He did this by bringing in 2.3 million stones. These stones, on average, are 10 feet wide and 80 feet long, and it would require a crane that we use today to lift cruise ships out of the water to move them. And somehow his engineers figured out how to use 2.3 million of them to increase the footprint of the Temple Mount. He wanted to have a summer home. He, being half Edomite, wanted to be able to get back to family. Of course, ruling in Israel, he needed to have access there. And so he found some land that had a beautiful view of the ocean halfway between, and he wanted to be on top of a mountain so that he could make sure that it was fortified and safe. The problem was there were no mountains to be found, just low-lying hills. And so he did what you do. He had a mountain built. 200 steps to the top. They said that the palace on top, before it was destroyed, had a swimming pool that was so large, it was 9 feet deep all the way across, that it was more convenient to take a boat to the middle where there was a gazebo than it was to swim to it. He built gymnasiums, theaters, aqueducts, fountains, colonnades, and streets all over the Roman Empire. To this day in Turkey, there is a temple that stands that was built by Herod and has his inscriptions on it. He did all of this. He did all of this to secure his position as king, constantly upholding Caesar as a god. In fact, at one point, he even funded the Olympic Games. Israel took on that burden all alone. How did he do that? He ruled the economy of Israel. Not only did he rule the economy of Israel, but he ruled the religion of Israel. At 2 different points, there were high priests that came and stood against him. He had both of them executed. The unthinkable. Herod ruled with absolute authority. Anybody that questioned his leadership, it didn't matter if you were his son. I talked last week about the fact that the people were suffering from somewhere between 80 and 90% taxation. There was a Roman tribute tax, a transit tax, a temple tax, a head tax, a poll tax, tolls, duties on goods. When it came time to build a new temple or to fund the Olympics, all that he did was add additional taxes. The base tax for a fisherman was half of their daily bring-in. The tax collectors stood on the docks and waited for the ships to come in, and then they took half of everything that came in just for Herod. And then they took whatever they wanted. If you were a farmer, 25 to 30% of everything that came in went immediately out to Rome. And then Herod took his portion. And then the tax collectors took their portion. This is why when we read through the Scripture and we see sinners and tax collectors in language sitting side by side, it is because tax collectors were the ones that were robbing from people. This was a wretched job. It was the worst of the worst. You did not have a friend who was a tax collector. That you have to maintain. Taxes take almost everything you've got, and you can barely survive. Oh yes, absolutely. History records countless groups making the journey to Rome to go and beg Caesar Augustus to do something about the heavy taxation that they were under. But remember, Herod was building for Caesar all over the empire. And every time he sided with Herod. Now, let's move to Matthew chapter 2. This is what Matthew is hoping that the readers will understand when they dive into these passages. Now, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, not just a marker in time, but the picture of a ruthless tyrant. Behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem. Here's just a little side nugget for you. So these wise men were most likely Persians. It's interesting because there's a church in Bethlehem that was not destroyed when the Persians came through destroying Christian churches. And the reason is because they say that it's a church that was built over the birthplace of Christ. And there are inscriptions on it with Persian writing, talking about wise men of kings who came to this place. And so when the Persians came and they saw it, they thought that it was a temple built unto their gods, not understanding that the writing that was on there was about these 3 men that showed up to worship this newborn king. How would they know about the king? I think that the most credible argument that I've heard is that these are the descendants of the Magi that Daniel was given rule over. Remember that during the exile in the Old Testament, Daniel was given authority over the Magi, that he would lead them, that he would teach them, right? And I believe that Daniel had been teaching them to look for the signs of the coming Christ. And generation after generation after generation after generation had taught their children that one day there's a king that's coming. And you're going to know that that king is coming. One of the signs is going to be a star that's going to come up in the sky. And it's going to rest right over the place where he will be born. And sure enough, here are 3 wise men who show up here in Jerusalem saying, "Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him." Herod's going, you mean Julius Caesar ascending into the heavens to take his place as a god among the gods? What are you talking about? I've heard about this, but I mean, I know about this star, but I haven't heard about what you're talking about right now. And it goes on, when Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. Do you know who lived in Jerusalem? The elite. You didn't get to own property and live in Jerusalem if you were poor. The only way you were living in Jerusalem, outside of living on the streets, was that you were somebody of wealth and influence. So you know what? Yeah, Herod was troubled, and you better believe that everybody that was counting on their financial security for tomorrow from Herod, they were troubled right alongside of him. Because what would a new king do? What would a new king do if they knew the secrets, if they knew the things that we had done, the things that we had allowed to happen, the things that we had stood for? And so, it says that he is assembling all the chief priests and scribes of the people. He inquired of them where the Christ was to be born. They told him, in Bethlehem of Judea, for so it is written by the prophet. It's already been said. It's not a mystery of mysteries. God spoke. And you, O Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For from you shall come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. Then Herod summoned the wise men secretly and ascertained from them what time the star had appeared. You know why he brought them in secretly? Because he could not let anybody know that he wasn't killing them on the spot. But he also needed to find this baby. And he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, go and search diligently for the child. And when you have found him, bring me word that I too may come and worship him. There is nothing about the history of Herod that even slightly suggests that this man would come and worship this baby as king. When he finished the expansion of the Temple Mount, he had a giant golden eagle centered above the temple doors. And as you entered in to worship Yahweh, the creator of all things, you first had to acknowledge that Caesar was God, and that was his symbol. A group of men had the audacity to come together and defy this. They climbed to the top of those doors and they ripped that eagle down and destroyed it. Every one of them were killed. This was not a man that cared about the God of Israel. It says that after listening to the king, they went on their way, and behold, the star that they had seen when it rose went before them until it came to rest over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. I just throw a little side thing out here for you right now. There is this amazing documentary on, it's actually on YouTube now. It's several years old. I think it's called The Star of Bethlehem, and it actually shows using NASA's space charts that the star existed. It actually shows how that star was created. I won't get into the science behind it, but you can actually, there was a guy, an attorney, that spent the time and actually traced this back and actually found that there was a star that stayed in the sky exactly how Scripture says that it did. And going into the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they fell down and worshiped him. Then, opening their treasures, they offered him gifts, gold and frankincense and myrrh. And being warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they departed to their own country by another way. Why? Let me tell you something, guys. You got to know. You know why Christianity exploded on the scene in a way that no religion had ever done? Why we saw so many converts in those first years? Because there was a promise that a new king is on the scene, that there is a new king coming. They had lived under ruthless kings. They had experienced tyranny, but there was a king that was filled with hope and a promise of love. Matthew is just asking the question, who is your king? Who's your king? Caesar's going down. Herod is going down. There's a new king on the scene. That king, Jesus, he died on a cross. He was resurrected. He is alive. And listen to me, just like those magi, for generation after generation after generation, look for the signs for the coming of the birth of Christ. So Jesus says, I have given you the signs. Know them and look for my return. Great conviction fell on my heart several years ago about this because I thought, I don't even know these signs. And so I took the time and I began to look at them, and I want to teach my kids and my grandkids. And if Jesus doesn't come back in my time, here's what I know is that he is on time. that he knows what he is doing, that he is the King of kings, that he is the Lord of lords, that when Scripture says that one day every knee will bow and every tongue will confess, it will be because in that moment, regardless of how you have viewed life, no matter how you have stood for life, you will acknowledge that there is a King that has come on the scene. Let's stand to our feet this morning, and I want to invite you to join with me as we celebrate that one true King. Our prayer ministry team is going to be at the front. If you want prayer, we want to pray with you. It's going to be loud. I know that it is. If you don't know Jesus, we want to pray with you, share with you the good news. He is alive, and he is the King of kings.